we read a lot of positive reviews written by artificial people. We find doctors using search engines, and he appears in the first place, not because he was really good, but because a lot of fake people made links to his name. We saw a video or read a story because many people did it too, but most of them were fake as well. We read some tweets because they were retweeted for a bunch of bots before. So, where is the truth today? Is the human communication related to it, or it is necessary today? We have said before that language or human communication is related to values. Our capacity to talk is needed to develop ourselves in society, speak to others, make us better, because we continuously know ourselves better. We can see our weakness, our greatest version, but only when communication is based on the truth. When our talk is fake, we cannot develop our society or ourselves as we can do with truth and values. Aristotle used to say that communication looks for the convenient, and the convenient must be good, because all the people tend to the good in any of their actions. Many of us would lie for convenience, but no one likes to be cheated. If we come back to the Frida Sophia's case for the rescuers, the main objective was to save that girl, to find her more than verify the news about her existence. In the case of Mexican people, their purpose day by day was to follow the news until they confirmed the girl was rescued, because many people consider this action to follow the news about this girl as their priority, because it was good for them. I listened to people who wasted hours seeing the broadcast of the efforts to rescue the girl, and everything was a lie. Neil Postman spoke about this in his book, Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, how the language is sometimes used for good or evil. For him, the uses of the language are mainly two: the intelligent talk and the dumb talk. Quote, I have not been trying to find out what intelligent talk is. I have been trying to find out what dumb talk is. Moreover, I want to focus on the dumb talk, which has two types: crazy talk and stupid talk. They are different because of the purposes of each. The first is a talk that may be entirely effective, but which has unreasonable or evil or sometimes trivial purposes. End of quote. In our example about Frida Sofia, we cannot know who invented her existence or which of the naval officers leading the rescue effort told reported that she had been seen to wiggle her fingers, or the believing that she had taken shelter under a granite table and was in contact with schoolmates. All of this was an invention with an end, of course with a trivial or maybe an evil purpose. We cannot know, but we can state this is a crazy talk. The second use is the stupid talk. It's a talk that has a confused direction or an inappropriate tone or a vocabulary not well suited to its context. To close my participation on this panel, I will say that crazy talk and stupid talk are two different versions of the fake news. On the media, many times we find people who talk about reasons without knowledge, and we find other people who likes to cheat for different reasons. Jaron Lanier said that we are being manipulated without knowing, and the cure is to close our social networks, because they are finishing with the truth, with our freedom. I add to this solution to be more reflective, more rational. As many years ago Aristotle sustained, if we are rational beings, if we search for the good, we have to look for the better for society and for us. And this is to get away from the network and to have more approach to human beings because we are losing ourselves in media. Thank you very much.
You translate Aristotle from Swedish or from English. The one that you use for Aristotle, did you translate it from Spanish or
From English.
From English?
Or from
so
Greek.
bad translations.
Yes.
They are fake translations.
Thank
Because
you.
for good means for virtue. That's the virtue. Not for good, but for virtue.
Okay.
Seppo has, I think that's how you translate in English. Virtue versus good virtue. The search for virtue. So we have, since we are in sports, you know what 9:59 means. Since I have I like to thank Seb as well because he's helping us as a coin the Russian Journal of Sports. He's an economist, and you know, we are receiving a lot of papers in sports that they are policy oriented. That's what we say for garbage papers. Policy oriented. But what point? There's nothing there. I'm kidding, but we like policy papers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for reminding me here. And this is perhaps not fake news. This is news that we remember after generation and generation. This happened in the 1930s, and Los Angeles politics. So he was a very good athlete who actually won several gold medals in the 1920s, and he was planning to participate 10,000 meter and marathon in the Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles, but the International Amateur Athletics Foundation suspended authority for international athletes because he was decided to be professional. And so he was suspended. And the Finnish authorities that they were acting without hearing. So not like we have in the false fake news. We are too weak to verify the facts. Facts are always very important, but in the case that something needs to be done, then you just have time to verify the facts. But okay, there was debate going on that Finnish Federation clears could be a professional. Today we know that he was a professional athlete at the time. He received plenty of money from USA races and Germany. But in Olympic Games this was not possible according to this International Amateur Athletics Federation. This is somehow funny thing because if we go really back to Olympic Games to was it 776 before Christ? First I'm not sure about that. I can't remember, but I think that the runners and athletes in these games they were professionals.
They were not professionals.
They were professionals.
Try to understand what you said, I'm not comment.
Okay.
They were not professionals.
Based on the line.
No, I'm not questioning, just I understand your English.
Okay. But okay. The very person who was actually very active in this thing was the Swede, Siegfried Edström. And this is something that we still remember after several or 19 years, because whenever we see that the Swedes are losing something, that's really good news to us. Even in the Scandinavia, we are telling jokes. We have a Norwegian, the Swede, and the Finn, and the Swede is always this. So we still remember these things that happened 90 years ago.
And we blame tricks and turns.
Yeah. And that had a very big impact on Atlantic relations with Sweden in the 1930s. Oh, that was it. So I think the thing is that probably it was not fake news, but it was news that was very influential. It is still very influential. Something happened almost 90 years ago. We still remember it. And whenever there is a Swede, we say, okay, we don't trust you because we're doing very bad things in the 1930s against our group.
Thank you very much. I'll make a comment on that later. It's very important what we imply. Our next speaker is from United States. We open up with the USA affiliation. We're going to close with the USA affiliation. And then be prepared for your intervention, questions. You don't have to ask questions, but you can say all the things.
Well, I am going to not bury fake news, but kind of phrase it. Okay? And I just really think sometimes we're overdoing it. And we should take a little bit of a step back and consider what we're talking about when we talk about fake news, because you said it at the beginning. There's a story out there, 90% true, 10% untrue. So is that fake news or just news that's not fully accurate? So what's the difference here? When we're talking about fake news, what really, definitionally, are we talking about? Does it have to be 100% in error to be fake? And if so, what percentage, what makes it fake? So it's something that we should really think about, but we really don't, because I come from the United States. I'm just going to be straight. The United States is built 100% on fake news. The primary story of the United States is the Boston Massacre. That story, as it went out, and as, if you know anything about American history at all, it was the nasty British firing on the virtuous colonists. And the colonists were doing nothing but just standing out on a cold winter's night. And those British soldiers killed them in cold blood. And that's the story that went out from the committees of correspondence, but that's not the story. The story was they were actually provoking the soldiers, and one of them threw something at the soldiers, and it hit the soldier, and the soldier recoiled, and the gun went off and hit someone. Then all the soldiers fired because they thought there was a problem. So that's fake news, but it is a founding part of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, a big purveyor of fake news in a very legitimate and very 21st century way. He spent time trashing his political rivals with the lies that were, well, today we would look at them and say, how does that even happen? And then we have the Maine. This was the Spanish-American War, and the Maine was sitting in Cuba's harbor. It blew up. The American press said they blew it up, the Spaniards, so now we have to go to war. But that's not how it happened. It was just a boiler that got overstoked, and it got hot, and it exploded. So, fake news. So, and then we have fake news. These are some of the other ones, Italy and others too, that are just global right now, or they're not really global now, but global recently. So you get a sense that this is happening everywhere. But here's what I really want to say about some of this. It is not new. As we've said before, this has been going on for a long time, which is why I'm here to a certain extent to praise fake news, because I think it's actually doing us a favor. So we've got a lot of things out there. We've had propaganda, disinformation, or misinformation, depending on how we want to define it. Basically, I think fake news is just a cousin of this, and we know how to deal with propaganda. We know how to deal with misinformation and disinformation. We've been doing it now for a long time. The tools to fight it are better today than they've ever been. They're not in danger. Our tools are better. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to crowdsource anything for its veracity. I've done it a number of times. Oh my. People are picking out the smallest detail that is not exactly according to the proper way. It's fantastic. So we have good tools. There's more awareness that this exists than ever before. So, as was said earlier, we are aware that it's out there. We're not complete dopes in this way. So, we have studies in the United States that show mostly it's older people sharing fake news, not younger people. And that goes along with what you found with Brexit, right? So, media literacy is vital, and we do have a lot of that going on. The thing is, know your personal biases, because a lot of the way we define fake news is simply by this. I disagree with it, therefore it's fake news. And we see this all the time. Donald Trump, when he calls a news outlet fake news, basically saying, I disagree with your coverage of me. That's what he's saying. But that's what a lot of us are saying about fake news. So as the social media mature, we will get more professionalism, but right now we're still in the process of figuring it all out. This is also not a new thing. We had it when radio came in. When radio came in, people were concerned. We have advertising coming into the house without any invitation. Oh my, we're just going to be marketing channels. Then there was television. Oh, we're going to sit at home and not interact with our neighbors, and we're going to be completely wrapped up in our own little devices. See if that sounds familiar. We're not going to talk to one another. The culture is going to begin to disintegrate. So when we're talking about this, I want to just mention some of these I've already done. One thing, I mentioned this morning, but I just want to say it again. Facts, because we talk about facts as a way to debunk fake news, but facts have no inherent meaning apart from interpretation. The problem with interpretation is a value judgment has to be made on that fact. And facts that come through value judgments, they are not able to be proven with that level of scrutiny because it's a value judgment that we put on it. So is Donald Trump a dangerous demagogue? For some of you, 100% rock solid fact. For others, maybe he's kind of a demagogue on certain things, but he's doing okay on others. Or maybe you really think he's great. But this is the thing, it's a value judgment that interprets the fact. This is why fake news is a problem. We need to be careful it doesn't devolve into, I don't like the idea, so I won't engage it. Because we have to engage it if we're ever going to come to some understanding of truth together. So this is why I'm willing to say fake news is not a bad thing, necessarily. It can have some good effects if we're cool-headed about it. But we have to be cool-headed about it. Because John Stuart Mill, moral philosopher, liberal moral philosopher, he has some good insights that I think inform this whole discussion. My journalism students get this in their last two classes with me in gory detail. I'm just going to give it to you in partial detail. So here's what Mill says. An opinion may contain truth, and if that is squashed, the truth is lost. Okay, that's an obvious thing. I don't like your fact, so therefore I'm going to crush your fact. Truth is lost. Or there may be a bit of truth even in a wrong opinion. So this is the story that's 60% accurate, 40% inaccurate, or 75% accurate, 25% inaccurate. But that 25% or that 75%, if we quash it under the guise of fake news, we lose the truth again. Because there is something there that could be good for us. And this is where I think fake news really does a good thing for us. And that is here. If an opinion is truth, the public tends to hold these on non-rational grounds until they are forced to defend the opinion. All of us have non-rational beliefs that we hold. Why do we hold them? We hold them because we hold them. But we don't really explore precisely why we hold them. We just do. And because of this, we need to have them tested. Do these things hold together? And fake news is a good doer of this very thing. And the last part, a widely held opinion. If everyone holds the same opinion, it loses its vigor every now and again, unless it is contested. And fake news is contesting ideas. And I think it's a good thing, because it's forcing us to re-examine some things that, frankly, I think all of us could stand to re-examine a little bit. So I don't think fake news is really a bad thing necessarily. Just a different point of view. Call it fake news if you want. That's my opinion. Okay, thanks so much.
Just to, actually, what we define as fake news is like hypothesis testing. Because that's what we do in economics. I mean, that's where you say, well, you say your opinion, it's like hypothesis testing.
Yeah.
But in economics, I think, because we are the queen or the king of social sciences, one of the things that we have to make sure is that we agree on the collection of information now. So that's why I have Eurostat, for example, I have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, what we call in the United States. So they collect data. So people fighting over the data. But once we agree on that, then we can test them again. We had 7, at least from my part, excellent presentations. And I have comments, just since this is not a normal sharing, I want to summarize a few things that I liked very much. I'm not going to say who said it, but because that's not important. But I should say fake news is not bad. Fake news exists in Atiner. Herodotus, if you read, for example, Herodotus, the father of history, then you will see a lot of fake news there. And he mentioned people believe that way. But from, I gather, at least as I received view from what was said, there are many dimensions of fake news. What Seppo said, for example, fake is fake news, when even though it's true, but for 100 years it affects the relation between the Finnish and the Swedes. Is it blowing out of proportion? It is, but blowing out of proportion, the fake news. It's true, but if you take something, a small thing, it's, I think in ancient philosophical called ism, they look at the table, some philosophers, they say, they try to find something wrong. And then when they find something wrong, say, the whole table is. So it's true though that there is something wrong with this table, but you cannot take this out. So you mentioned, a lot of people mentioned the fact, we call it stylized. That's what we call stylized fact. Like we say, okay, let's agree what are what is to be discussed. I like fake news. I laugh at people that they believe. It's entertaining. Usually people are coming and they say, you know, I read in the newspaper this, and I laugh. It's good. It's entertaining for me. Only if it has an effect, and usually it has an economic effect. It's a problem. I served for many years as a policy maker, as a political person, and the newspapers were covering my action. 99% of them were lies. All the actions of the people here, they must have sex, money embezzlement, so they make up stories. And of course I won in the courts, but it doesn't matter. For them, what it matters is that they can sell. So if what they pay me is less than what they made by selling the story, still it pays off to distribute fake news. What do I have anything else to say? There is a distinction. There was a distinction between fake news in terms of saying the truth and non-truth. I consider fake news when you don't say the truth because you are doing it for honorable purpose. Still it's fake news. So you cannot condemn fake news if you don't know the intention. I hide some facts because I don't want to insult them. I don't want people. Sometimes the damage by insulting people is higher, all that of impossibility is higher. Just think about it, in revealing the truth. I mean, we're not here the apostles of truth. So sometimes it's, I mean, you see, since I care about women, not about men, I'm saying that because in Athens you have to specify that since antiquity, that's my preferences. It's not bad to say to a woman, that's very dangerous, to say to a woman, you look beautiful today. I wouldn't say to a man, even though it's fake, it's not true. I mean, everybody feels good. I mean, I don't know what is wrong with that. I mean, what is wrong with that? Be nice to people, even though it's fake. But I don't know if you get the meaning, but you go outside, you will see, sometimes being nice, even though you are fake, it's much better than being a true person. So this is because you said, someone said about truth. I mean, you have to be very, very careful. Sometimes the damage of truth is so high, it's better to lie. See? And innocence is an important thing. People are stupid, they believe whatever they read, but it's their problem, not my problem. Why should I care? I don't understand this argument, unless you want to sell to them. Then do marketing, we have branding here, we have a lot of presentation. You know, you can fool people if you doesn't, but can you fool them forever? Especially if you sell something that is not good. I'm talking about to make money. Anyway, I think that's what I got from, I have more, but that's what I got from the presentation. I don't know if it's good or bad for you. Is there any comment, question? Yes.
Okay, here's my big concern about this. First of all, I think we need to really have a definition of what fake news is, and I disagree with pretty much everything I've heard here.
Give us a definition.
Fake news is designed to be disruptive. That is what it's designed for. And what scares me,
So it's not innocent enough.
it's not innocent, and I don't want us to trivialize it and say it's just funny. It's not, at least not in the United States right now. And here's what I mean by that. I actually have all of the stuff that the Russians put out for our 2016 election. The New York Times and the Washington Post did a great job of pulling the social media ads that they had posted and who they were targeted for and where they went. And there was an awfully lot of Christian versus Muslim messages. People get killed as a result of those kinds of messages. And we're seeing in the United States that it's becoming more and more dangerous for journalists, for example, because our president says to the people at his rally, there is CNN, those are the fake news people, and they turn around and say awful things to them and threaten them. And it's never been that way in the United States.
Why you don't call it propaganda, you call it fake?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there is a very fine line between those things.
Yeah. Propaganda, Hitler used propaganda and we want to persuade.
Well,
the
our
people.
government uses
Yeah.
propaganda, and
Yeah.
all governments use propaganda.
Because I like fake news, so I
But
don't want
it's
to waste
different
with
when
what
you're
you're
trying
saying
to hurt
serious.
somebody and to sow the seeds of distrust. And I'm from Louisiana, the home of David Duke. So we have seen this huge increase in this strong right movement that is very anti-black, is very anti-Jewish. And we've seen the attacks on the mosques and on the...
Why don't you call it hate in literature?
I said what?
Why don't you call it hate in literature? Hate. I mean, that's in Greece, it's a violation of law if you spread things like
But
that.
it's
Fake,
not in
they're-
the United States. That's
Nor
No.
could it be. Nor could it be.
Nor could it be.
Under our First Amendment, it would not be possible to make any of that speech illegal. And our First Amendment is the broadest free speech protections probably in almost any country around the world. I've actually had other countries, I had a turn at the Department of State, and they're utterly puzzled by the U.S. Free speech. There is no hate
So in the
speech.
United States, I can go and say all the Jews or all the Greeks, Americans, they're stupid, they're good, and nobody, it's not a hate in literature, because it's not.
Completely legal, 100% legal to do so. And now other people can speak out against you, and that's the idea behind the First Amendment is
But you
bad.
mentioned something else though, that's not fake news. You mentioned actions based upon fake news. Because
Well, but
they are
it
not-
leads to, the fake
I-
news leads to.
Not always, not always, but I mean, just, you mentioned that I believe, because I believe, for example, that X, Y, Z, and then I go and kill the X, Y, Z. I know a lot of people that they believe in fake news, but they don't believe in news.
But we are
I'm
seeing
one
that
of them.
happen in the United States,
I
is
know.
what I'm saying.
You want to make a comment?
I was just going to say, I was a journalist well before what's going on now. I was threatened several times. And so it's not a new thing. That is a thing that has been going on. Journalists have been disrespected, not like distrusted and threatened, and sometimes physically so. So it's not...
And they are killed around the globe.
It's not, well, yeah, they're getting killed elsewhere, but that's a different situation, it strikes me, because that is generally happening in nations that have hate institutions. where they have,
I mean, you.
oh, sorry, yeah, weak institutions.
Weak institutions.
Yeah, where there are weak institutions, there tends to be more violence and of that type. But when it comes to, I hear this a lot, and I do talk to my students about this too, when it comes to journalists. Right now, there is a lot of, let's just say there's not really good data at this time that one leads directly to the other. It may lead indirectly, but right now it's just a guess for us mostly. So it's not really A leads to B. And that's something that we should be careful, and equivalents, at least for now, we should be careful about drawing because the data isn't good enough to draw yet.
John?
I would just add, sympathetic to the idea that, we need more clarity on what we mean by the term fake news. Part of the problem is that so many people use it for different purposes, that if we could say as academics, this is news to us, but that might leave us out of the conversation much more broadly. But I wanted to add one of the areas where I think there's a significant question mark. It's emerged, certainly it's been there since the mid or latter part of the 20th century, is political satire that is done in the form of, quote, fake news, where they create fake format of news, a news program or whatever, and they're doing it to make a point politically, sometimes maybe just for humor, but other times it speaks to a larger truth that traditional media can't get to, where they know somebody's lying, all right? But you can't really prove it. But through political satire done in the form of news, you can reveal that this person is completely lying and you call them on it. So that's another aspect of us that gets, I think, it's another interesting side of this.
But this relates to freedom of speech. It relates to freedom of speech. People, you cannot say, he's lying, but he has the freedom to lie. So you have the freedom to say that.
Well, some of the comics don't have the freedom to do the political satire. I think there was a case in Egypt recently where a comedian doing some of the same kind of work. It doesn't have that freedom anymore.
We knew what happened in Paris, for example. No? Anybody that he didn't talk,
I agree that fake news is not a news story, but it becomes worse and worse. That's because of social media, and social media facilitates the negative effects of fake news, and we could see different phenomena in different countries. But we all have fake news, and it makes bad influence on each society. So I quite agree with.
What do you mean by social media? Google is social media. Like if I
social
search,
media means that Facebook,
Twitter,
yeah, and Instagram, and but some of the presenters mentioned about the maybe 90% authentic that's picture, but the 10% text is fake. Then you see this kind of photo is become more and more common and popular on Facebook or Twitter because it is a much benefit on fake news. So it is one kind of model we need to much more focus this kind of fake news. And so I agree that we need to seriously consider what's the definition of fake news. How about the satire or kusum? Is it news? For my own opinion, I think fake news, it should be newsworthy. People would like to know and believe it is a news. Then this kind of whatever fact or opinion will make us love, will make us angry. And according to the research, angry has more powerful to make fake news become spread a lot. So I think definition we need to discuss more. Is what I think.
You want to say something?
Yeah. Also with respect about if we should lie or say something, beyond the things that we are convinced about. And I think, That depends on the specific role. And based on the role of science, for example, I think, I mean, science has, when you consider it as a kind of a public good, science has a kind of a duty to contribute to the best understanding of so-called complex reality as possible. So there's for sure not one truth, but I also think that science does not have the mandate for directly putting a kind of...
What do you mean by science? Physics, chemistry, or economics as well?
Not economics. I mean,
social science.
When you
social sciences.
social sciences, natural sciences, it just doesn't matter. I think there's a general code. There's a kind of also of morality behind that science actually should not lie. When we say, for example, like governmental intervention studies, sure. I mean, that depends. One could even argue that strategy itself is a lie. Because I mean, it's not just like based on principle of a so-called attempt to try to reach not objectivity, but at least intersubjective kind of joint understanding. So I think, I mean, it depends also on the role. So therefore, specific duty of science.
I think it needs to be examined more from a theoretical perspective too. And to me, cultivation theory is the obvious place. It occurs to me that cultivation effect may actually be amplified because of the source credibility. People trust information from friends and people they know and people like them more so than advertising or news media. And its cultivation effect may even be more amplified.
That's a counterbalance effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and in this case with the UAE and Qatar, I mean, this was a very, to my mind, a very deliberate attempt to cast aspersions on the legitimacy of the UAE government in religious terms in order to discredit them in the region.
I think she raised an issue that deserves a lot of attention because in my mind, fake news is not propaganda. That's what my view is. We have to separate. Propaganda is something, but hate leaders is something. And she raised a very important issue, but not part of our thing. Fake news, I take it very light. Because it's only ridiculous people that they believe in. Propaganda is something else. It has to do with your ideology. It's penetrated through the education system. And social media is like, I might be wrong, but I want to separate these two things because what we are saying is very important. We know from history that it's very important.
There are so many points here that we actually, I think we have many different ideas kind of folding into this nebulous term of fake news. It has crossed the line to propaganda in many places in the world because the government has started to use, members of government have started to use the phrase fake news. And so now the term fake news is applied to situations where we have, through scientific empirical evidence, demonstrably false information being presented as true. That's one kind of fake news. Then the other ones are silly rumors or stories or personal attacks. The third problem, though, is when legitimate news, real stories and real facts are labeled fake news, conveniently to be dismissed by the powers that be. So fake news is now being used as a bludgeon to hit back stories that people in power don't like. Oh, ignore it. It's the mainstream media. It's fake news. So again, we're returning to the example in the United States because it's the one I'm most familiar with. But when someone points out, he's not really a billionaire. He claims he's a successful billionaire. The New York Times publishes an expose and shows he's lost more than $1.2 billion in a decade. It's fake news. No matter how much evidence you marshal, and he's able to get people to dismiss it. So you now have the problem of real fake news that is kind of propaganda, and then the label being used to swat away and propagandize still further reality. Take it away.
But I don't know if an important issue we are going to come back to that. The important is that whether we can move through the social media, we can mobilize the masses to do things. That relates to propaganda. I'm not sure that in Greece at least, a lot of social media say, okay, let's go to Syntagma Square tomorrow and have a revolution. And nobody shows up. And nobody shows up. And nobody shows up. I mean, there are a lot of calls like that. Then people, millions of people respond to this, and they have the controversy, but nobody shows up. I don't think social media, and I read, before I came here, I read something in the fake news, Google searching for something, that there was a study, I don't remember now the study, that only 1% of the youth believes in social media. It's amazing if it's true.
But I'll
Sorry.
give you another example.
Give it.
We had eradicated measles in the United States. And there was one article that was based on fake data from the UK that was published, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, that linked that to autism. And
Yeah,
we
yeah.
had this huge thing.
We have that in English as well.
So now we have this huge measles outbreak, and it hasn't mattered how much the scientists, the doctors, or the news media have said there's no connection, there's no scientific evidence. But the big part of it happened in the Jewish community in New York City because there was a rumor that there was pork in the vaccine. And so we've now had this huge explosion. And of all the things that have happened, my students were the most upset about the fact that there was a measles epidemic, that parents weren't getting their children vaccinated, and they were being put at risk, and their friends were being put at risk because of something that is totally fake news and has totally been distributed through social media.
My definition of fake
And
news is
people
not
have
that.
died because of that.
That's propaganda.
This is another example is climate change. I mean, these are not trivial matters. We have a political party in power who's labeled climate change as being fake news, and we're all going to suffer the consequences.
I think we confuse two things. Fake news about climate change is because they say that there's no enough evidence supporting that. I'm just playing the devil's advocate. So this is what they are saying. And,
But the measles thing is not propaganda because it did not come from the government. This is totally.
yeah, exactly. But this, I don't think it's fake news. This one. I mean, I define something that fake news. I take it very light. Fake news to say that Gregor is a tall guy. I mean, that's fair. That's how it is. But this is very serious matters. Call it fake news. I mean, I don't know if you understand my. That's why I take it what we are saying very serious. This is propaganda. This penetrates the education system. I mean, it's your everyday action. Believing that Trump is a nice, doesn't affect, I mean, I can believe, but that doesn't affect my everyday life. I don't know.
There is also another problem. We can take fake news unseriously. We can take them very light. We can laugh at them, but the problem is among youngsters, I believe. Because in Turkey, I have a PhD student. She has been conducting in-depth interviews between teenagers. She has done for so long about how many? More than 60 interviews between teenagers from 13 years old to 18 years old, and they don't know about fake news. I mean, they heard about fake news, but they take media literacy courses and so on, so they know all about it. But from the social media, social networks, what they read or what they see or what they do, they take all of them as truth. So I think, I believe that they are not sensibilized yet.
Yeah, but in country, all the youth take them as truth. I mean, I don't believe, it's very difficult for me to believe that all the youth take them. I know a lot of youth in Turkey and in Greece that they question whatever you sell them, they question. You want to say something?
Yes. For me, from my point of view, in principle, we have to step back a little bit and look at the phenomenon of fake news from a little bit more distance. I cannot evaluate fake news if I don't know what kind of truth I'm talking about or what kind of reality I'm talking about. So I want to use an old Arabic quote that says, the truth is always more than one form. Or I can refer to the Rashomon principle. Rashomon was a movie in the 50s, I think, by the Japanese director Kurosawa. It's a movie, you know, that tells the story about a murder where a woman is murdered in the woods. And there are 5 witnesses. And all the 5, so the witnesses are interviewed. And all the 5 people see a different story. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the function of truth within a social system? The function of truth within the social system is to create sense. It's a tool to create sense. Yeah? And sense is what we, so to speak, produce all the time. So in that matter, we just have to, or reality, for example, is what you and I agree that a certain thing is, that certain things are within the room and we use them for a certain matter. But it could be very different. Yeah? And also within a social system, it doesn't, the social dynamic is something very different than personal beliefs. So I may not believe what I'm reading is fake news, but I still may act accordingly simply because I'm caught within a social dynamic. These are very fundamentally different concepts. So within a social system, it is, no, I lost it. Within the social system, it is the dynamic that counts. Yeah, and that's not a simple cause and effect phenomenon.
Look, I mean, for me, and I think one thing is, for me, fake news in Greece, especially when we had the crisis, there were a lot of rumors that people were saying all over Europe. I mean, I don't think it affects anything. Most of the people were laughing. I don't think it affects it. Like even the mobilization of masses, it does not affect it. The mass media played a more important role than the social.
I think I remember you once in another one of these saying when you were under austerity. Austerity, yeah, it's just a word. We're not actually doing anything. That's austerity. So
I think we blow things out of proportion. I don't see any action. I like to see action. I want to see, for example, okay, people write something and then fake news and then something happens. It's exactly what you are saying that is the most important. Because if this leads to hate literature, leads to propaganda, they want to call it different name, then we're in trouble.
I just worry about people being killed. And
No, that's
where
very
I see a
important.
lot.
That's not a fake thing. That's not a fake news. This is something more important. And I don't think we can, it's a fake news that we can play, because since our deep we do have people that have been killed. Okay?
But in response, I mean, wasn't there empirical evidence from one of our presenters on the Brexit case that people's exposure to fake news, outright fabrications, influenced the outcome of that election, which has changed the course?
If they're in or out. So what's, I mean, even if it's affected, people were not.
But you're saying, like, so fake, you're saying people don't take fake news seriously.
Why it's so important?
But if it's influencing the way that people are voting and how they believe about things and what they're informed of, then they're not taking it lightly. This is one of their main sources of information. And so I think the distinction of if this is fake news or if it's propaganda, and if propaganda is only because the government's involved, and that line doesn't necessarily demarcate the impact, which does seem to be, at least as I understand it, and if I'm misrepresenting your presentation, please let me know. But if it's influencing the outcome of elections, which are then affecting policy, then this is, you know, something to be taken seriously. And no doubt, fake news has existed for a long time, and people have tried to spread
lies,
falsehoods.
not fake news. It's lies, people lies. But the only bad thing about this thing was that there was an MP that was killed because of hate in literature. Someone killed him, but he was a crazy guy. He was a lunatic.
Yeah, that's probably not related to
To the Brexit. Okay.
question about that Brexit thing though. Because I know it's come up and I understand the argument, but my question about that is, where do we draw the line between political persuasion and lies? Because politics is all about persuasion and getting people to vote. And as far as I know, and I know some about Brexit, but I'm certainly clearly not at your level, you know, that's political dirty tricks that have always existed, right? I mean, of a type. So is that out of bounds now? And if so, how do we judge where the dirty tricks have to stop?
I think it's really difficult to judge where they have to stop because obviously they've always existed. I mean, Carol Coldwaller does a really good TEDx speak on this, talking back to the first election in the UK where they walked around with Neil Barrows and buying voters. And so she talks about also the dark advertising. It's the amount of money that was spent on anything is what I think shocked the policymakers in the government and the kind of methods that were used. People didn't foresee that and the impact that would have. I think particularly for the belief, the results basically. So I think one of the things it's done is kind of shocked the government, the current government as is, into thinking about election policy because there are, outside of social media, there's very strict rules on the amount of money in the UK you can spend on an election, which don't exist on social media. So they're rethinking that.
Yeah, and that makes sense because that's a policy decision. And the thing that we should be very careful about is viewpoint discrimination on certain things because fact checkers and other things like that can easily veer into viewpoint discrimination where we have a disfavored idea at present. And that must not be said. But then culture will change and that idea will become acceptable. But it's been marginalized to the point where now you can't speak about it. So that's my big thing here is that I am a really big First Amendment person. I'm really like Congress shall make no law, and I really think no law is no law, but that's my thing. And so I'm a little concerned about viewpoint discrimination under the guise of stamping up. I just think we have to fight that.
I think that it's really difficult. It's a really grey area, particularly when it comes to something like Facebook and the advertising and the remit of that. So, but I think that kind of, I don't think Zuckerberg, was going to be held to account. I think they wanted a conversation. By kind of not turning up with the statements.
Slap in the face.
Everybody that has this internal urging to say something before we end.
One thing I would just add in this makes I too.
Summarize.
I believe that freedom of speech and all that, but something that's different now is we have digital robots.
Digital what?
Digital robots that are enabled by data and sophisticated analysis. That yes, at some level they might have been created by a human, but now they're acting somewhat independently, and they may not be deliberately taking one side or another, but instead just creating expressions that are at least partly false and are designed to do nothing but really to disrupt. And so, should they have the same right? Because it's a digital robot. In other words, does that same set of laws apply to robots the same way that they would to humans? We know they apply to corporations, so maybe they shouldn't apply to robots, but should they also apply to robots who are from another country? So that's another aspect. So I think where we're heading is very different in both quantity and quality than the fake news we've had for the past how many millennia.
Okay, I think we should revisit the issue. We have in a month there was a session about hated literature in history. And I think if I can just summarize, I like to define the terms. Hate is at the top, propaganda maybe, and then fake news will be at the end. And I think hate is the most important thing, which is my point. Say about other people, other groups of people, I don't mind if you hate me, but I really mind if you say, because of you I hate all groups. I mean, I hate all men. I hate all whatever. This is, I think, that's the feeling that I have. Like, I want to separate it because if we put on persuasion, very that we didn't touch it. I mean, can I lie in order to persuade people so they can have message? Is it moral? Aristotle will answer it. Thank you very much for being here. I'll see you tonight. Olga, don't ask me, Olga. Olga, Costa, where do they meet this guy?
8:30 in the lobby.
8:30 in the lobby. Okay.